Mike, good afternoon. How are you?
Doing great, Kevin. How are you?
Oh, man, we're doing fantastic. And talk about some of the players first that the Falcons let go. A lot of talk that the Falcons wanted to bring Keith Brooking back, couldn't reach an agreement. Is there still a chance he comes back?
Well, he hasn't signed with another team yet so far, so yes, there's always that chance there. And really only one player out of that group, being Lawyer Malloy, kind of told, thank you, and the teams, agreed to part ways at that point. And Dominique Foxworth, of course, going to Baltimore and signing a deal today, so he is off the market. But always a chance there with Keith Brooking as long as he's still out there. And Thomas Dimitroff said at the Combine last week that the two sides were talking and that Keith had a decision to make. So you think from reading into that there were some negotiations going on and that there was the ball kind of getting thrown back and forth in each other's court.
Sounds like from some of the newspaper reports that maybe it wasn't going to happen, that if it didn't happen before free agency began, that it might not happen. Is that just maybe some early speculation there?
Perhaps, but there's definitely, when you look at free agency, the history across the league isn't good for guys who actually hit the open market to come back unless something specific or special happens. So it's been a really weird free agency market so far, so I wouldn't put anything past this. When you look at Albert Haynesworth getting $100 million and supposedly teams just calling him immediately at 12:01 trying to give him $15-16 million just right off the bat, that's pretty strange, especially in today's economy. So really anything can happen.
No recession in the NFL, apparently.
Absolutely. It doesn't appear that way. At least in Washington, it doesn't look like it.
I guess not. Daniel Snyder just throws money at everybody. You look at what Thomas Dimitroff has said about the Atlanta Falcons in free agency. His words are, Falcons are not going to be big players in free agency. How do you interpret that in terms of what the Falcons are looking at doing here?
Well, the first thing you have to do is interpret that and think about the timing of when he said it. He said it at the Combine. He said it right after a whole bunch of guys got tagged in the franchise process. You've got players like Julius Peppers and a lot of those guys that you would think the Falcons might be taking a look at. All of a sudden, they're taken off the market. You look at some of the top corners. You have the top corner in Oakland signing a long-term deal. You have Dante Robinson in Houston getting franchised. So you look at those kind of defined positions of need, and a lot of guys are immediately taken off the table. And then you get reports right there, too, that Albert Haynesworth is going to, quote, test the market, test the waters to see what his value is. Well, everybody knew Albert Haynesworth was going to be making a lot of money. So it really kind of seemed that maybe the guys the Falcons were targeting, maybe the guys they wanted to take a run at were kind of getting removed, and then you take a step back and say, you know what, that's fine. We're going to build through the draft anyway. That's been our MO all along, and we'll look for role players in free agency. And there's still a lot of role players out there, a lot of guys that could fit needs on this Falcons roster. And that the only problem is that if you're a fan that wants to make a big splash early, probably not going to happen in Atlanta this year.
What type of players do you think they're looking for to supplement the roster? I don't necessarily need specific names, but are they looking for defensive guys that can come in and play roles? What are they looking for in terms of supplemental players?
Well, defense is where the team's going to take a long, hard look. Coach Smith said that last week. Without wanting to tip his hand, he said, we made a lot of moves on offense last year. Michael Turner, Ben Hartsock in free agency, and then even Jason Elam, you can't forget him in terms of an offensive player being able to score. And then in the draft with Matt Ryan, Harry Douglas, Sam Baker. So there's going to be a focus paid on defense, especially when you consider that 5 starters from the defense from last year are free agents or have already gone away. Malloy not going to be coming back. Grady Jackson, Keith Brooking, Dominique Foxworth not going to be coming back. So defense is kind of where you look. And you look at guys, Ron Bartell from the Rams, a cornerback, a guy with some starting experience. Steve Weichen of NFL Network and I have kind of talked about him as a guy that the team might be looking at. And then you go and you think about guys like Cato June, Angelo Crowell, a linebacker in Buffalo. Some guys there you think, okay, that might be a spot where you can get a type of tier B guy to come in. And again, to name a name, you got to think about Paul Spicer in Jacksonville. I know his name's been thrown around in some reports so far, a defensive end who was cut. He's 33, but he's a Mike Smith guy, played there when Coach Smith was a defensive coordinator and team captain type, a lot of experience there. So those are some guys who, if you want to throw out some names and kind of some that have been connected with the Falcons so far in reports and some not, those are some guys there. And you got to think some of those guys can become starters, but most of them you think are going to be role players.
Are they essentially looking for Band-Aid guys that'll stay on the roster a year or two until either you go out and draft somebody to replace them or you just find another way to go?
I don't know if any team looks at a guy as a Band-Aid guy. I think that Coach Smith and Thomas really do a good job looking ahead to see what's going to be in the next year's drafts, especially. So there is that option where you look at a free agency class, and maybe it's not as strong as a position as you want, but if you look at the draft 2 years from now, which they do go ahead and start scouting players in 2010, 2011 to see who's going to be available. Then maybe you say, we'll fill a role here, knowing that the draft is going to be stronger down the road. But when you look at the history of the NFL and how guys who have come out of nowhere to play, I don't think you can ever just tag someone like that right away.
J. Michael Moore, AtlantaFalcons.com, joining us here on the Afternoon Blitz on the Fan Sports Radio 790 and 1350. The draft coming up in a couple of months. Last year was very offensive dominated. Do you expect this year to be very defensive in nature in terms of the draft?
With the talent that's in the draft and the guys that kind of catch your eye, especially at the Combine, I had the joy of going up there and covering it for a few days, and you listen to these guys talk and look at their film. Defense is definitely where it's at this year, especially at linebacker, corner, and safety. And coincidentally, that's where a lot of people are saying the Falcons are going to have to make some moves to fill some spots. So I'm pretty excited about the draft. I think the Falcons are too down the hall. I think the GM and the scouts are pretty excited. And there's going to be a lot of players at number 24. I think that's a misconception that when you pick that low in the draft, you really have to just kind of shrug your shoulders and go with the best guy available. Not so, because there are going to be a lot of linebackers who are probably going to fall, maybe some defensive tackles who are going to fall. So that's where you can really make a good pick.
I don't think Falcons fans should have those misconceptions. J. Mike, the Falcons did very well in every single level of the draft last year.
That they did. When you look back at the draft class from last year, it's really phenomenal to think that you got a franchise quarterback, a franchise left tackle, a wide receiver punt returner in Harry Douglas, who really came on strong at the end of the year, a starting middle linebacker in Curtis Lofton, Croy Bierman, a fifth-round pick who did really well at rushing the passer. There was really not any major misses or bust or whatever you want to call it. And what's equally impressive of that to me is that Thomas Dimitroff takes a job here in January and is able to put together one of the greatest draft classes in franchise history with a short amount of time to work. And that's one thing I talked to him about at the Combine was, hey, are you excited about having a whole year to prepare this time and get your scouting system down? And his eyes just lit up. And I think that fans are going to be excited and see what this team can really do when they have time to prepare and time to really scout the guys who might be the diamonds in the rough.
I heard an awful lot at the Combine about the tight ends at the Combine, and the Falcons talking about tight ends a lot. Is that a position you see them addressing in the draft, given they have so many needs on defense?
Well, the report in the AJC this morning was that Justin Peele, who was a tight end signed right before the start of the season and caught a few touchdowns and became a pass-catching tight end in this offense, has agreed to come back, has agreed to re-sign. Again, that's in the AJC. So if he comes back, you have to think, okay, maybe there's definitely, you have your top two tight ends coming back from the previous year. So maybe you don't address tight end as high in the draft. That said, there are some really good tight ends who, in my opinion, are going to drop kind of into that third, fourth round range. Jared Cook, South Carolina guy, ran the 4.5 at the 40. Probably saw his draft stock increase, but I think concerns about his blocking ability. And there's concerns about all of these tight ends and blocking because all of them came from that spread system in college. They didn't have to line up on the line very often. I think they're going to drop, and maybe you do see the team take a chance. But there's definitely some defensive talent there at the end of the draft, and when you think about the moves that are possibly happening in free agency here, that might be where the team's going to look.